Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here today. I'm a part of a group of 3, and so they will be joining us from Zoom. My name is Kalema. I am a fourth-year Ph.D. candidate. I'm based at UCL at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which is led by economist Mariana Mazzucato. And in my work, I'm earning my degree in innovation and public policy. And so I'm really interested in thinking about kind of more of the policy and political dimensions around innovation, particularly digital innovation. Also, speakers who will be joining me today include Simon's son. So Simon is an S.J.D. candidate. He's based at Indiana State University in their School of Law. And then we also have Marie Shabaya, who's joining us. She's a Forbes contributor from Forbes Africa, and also a managing director of an entity that I just need to pull up in my notes. But very excited to talk with you more about Ubuntu. So Ubuntu being kind of a philosophical and ontological lens that we use to kind of rethink data privacy from a new orientation. And so I will let Simon, or I will let Maria take it away. Simon, are you there?
Yes.
Great.
Oh, many times.
I see a lot of myself. Very nice to meet you.
And hi, Marie. Nice to see you as well.
Nice to see you.
So I'm just going to see if the slides are about to pop up, and we'll take it away. Or maybe.
On that, so.
Okay. So maybe what we can do in the interest of time is while we wait for those to come up. Oh, are they up? Great. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, Simon, back to you. Or Marie, sorry. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
All right. So the slide up on the screen, I can just start.
Please feel free to start.
All right. Great. So AI, like any new technology, has huge potential benefits for the African continent. And there are some more of the practical applications of AI in Africa, such as increasing sustainable and green growth productivity through agriculture and conservation, increasing human productivity through education, and also increasing industrial productivity through infrastructure development and the more efficient resource management. Moving on. Whilst there's so much potential benefit for AI in Africa, it is a nuanced problem. And part of it is because AI development in Africa is still in its nascent phase due to several factors, including the high cost of building data infrastructure, limited internet accessibility across the continent, a shortage of powerful computing resources needed to train AI models, as well as the more pervasive basic issues such as power shortages and the lack of necessary technical resources on the ground. Further to that, there are also geopolitical forces that play on the continent that affect AI development. For example, the involvement of Chinese tech titans in Africa's AI sector is indicative of concerted effort not only to promote economic collaboration, but also for these countries to establish strategic footholds within the continent. And their presence and investments in various African countries underscore the intricate web of competing global geopolitical interests, trade relations, and technological expansionism, which are now shaping the current landscape of AI development in Africa. And adding on to that, currently, Western tech giants such as Amazon, Google, and Facebook wield considerable control over Africa's digital infrastructure. So fundamentally, the challenge arises from the existing data governance framework, which is rooted in the philosophy of privacy. And inherently Western concept that presents a lot of complexity for African citizens, in comprehending the associated rights. In framing a solution, we're proposing an alternative, an African data commons. And our proposed interventions look at a construct data governance framework that promotes the equitable advancement of AI in Africa. And this is done in three ways. Our primary focus is on the shared nature of data. And we're also looking to clarify the concept of data, its definitions and applications in building a sustainable long-term AI ecosystem for the African continent. And it includes the issue of data governance writ large within this context. Secondly, we scrutinize the philosophy of Ubuntu, which we'll go into deeper later on in this presentation, its applications from three unique perspectives, which is decolonialism, information ethics, commons governance as well. And finally, we explore the establishment of an African data commons by evaluating various data sharing protocols, primarily drawing on Cass and Ostram's work from 2007, differentiating artifacts, facilities, and ideas by treating information as a common pool resource or CPR. The objective here is to establish an inclusive data governance framework in Africa that nurtures a bottom-up approach. All right. So the existing data regulation framework is mainly modeled on the EU's GDPR. So currently, most of the world's data regulations adopt a framework that centers around personal information. And this imperative has culminated in the formation of the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union, which is a comprehensive framework designed to safeguard individual data privacy.
Marie, I'm sorry to cut you off for a moment. I was asked to see if you could turn down your mic a bit.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. There's a common personal data protection theme or principles contained in the legislation adopted by African jurisdictions which have enacted comprehensive data protection legislation. Approximately 60% of the continent's jurisdictions. Notice, choice, and consent, as well as data security, cut across all these pieces of legislation. The existing continental governance on AI is a bit varied. So around 36 countries in Africa have some form of data protection legislation. Only 25 of these have some form of protection against automated processing. Although it's minimal, it's very important for AI development in future. 8 countries do not have any protections at all with regards to automated processing. It's also important to note that in general, existing data protection laws in Africa contain provisions covering the major principles and data subjects' rights as in the GDPR. However, enforceability is a big issue in the majority of these laws. The prevalence of non-comprehensive data protection and privacy laws in many African countries make enforcement difficult and create loopholes for data controllers and processors to exploit and ultimately compromise the objective of these laws. The same thing goes with data localization and also cross-border data transfers. So the regulations are there, but they're quite young and they don't cover all the bases needed to have a thriving AI ecosystem. Moving on to the existing data regulatory framework. So for now, given the current context, Africans are more predisposed to give away their data without adequate examinations of their rights and best interests before doing so. And why is this the case? It's because Africa for a very long time has been a passive participant in the global data ecosystem. And Valuable information is often extracted, controlled, and monetized by entities external to the continent. And a lot of these disparities are quite practical and owing to the fact that to date, the continent remains largely unwired and a majority of its knowledge catalogs are not digitized or even available online. And the issue is pervasive both philosophically and regulatory. And since the early 2000s, scholars and scientists working on constructing a global information ethics infrastructure have struggled to define and even provide a framework to resolve this African issue. Moving forward to framing a solution. So a huge part of our proposal in building this African data governance model is that we should allow for more effective data sharing mechanisms. And current proposals within the literature include personal information management systems. These are a series of technologies developed to offer data subjects a means to leverage control over the processing of their data. It's an integrated personal management of data that appeared in the literature about 30 years ago. In a data trust employs the framework of trust, a legal trust in definition between those who pull data and those who manage it. So when a person or group hands over their data to a trustee, it means that the trustee has the fiduciary duty to act according to the predefined terms and conditions and never in their own self-interest. A data collaborative generally refers to emergent forms of public-private partnerships that allow for collaboration and information sharing across sectors and actors. And finally, a data commons, which we're proposing here, is a cloud-based data platform with a governance structure that allows a community to manage, analyze, and share its data within itself. So finally, moving on to framing a solution, which is Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is more than just a mere philosophy. It's an unwritten law that governs the functions of most traditional African societies. It's a quiet rhythm in how we work. And it's encompassed by the Zulu axiom, Ubuntu ngamuntu ngabantu. I am because we all are. And it's a wisdom that fundamentally understands that humanity and personhood in all its forms. So we believe that as a worldview and a value system and set of ethics, Ubuntu enriches our theoretical and conceptual understanding of our core subjects of the study, which is the African data commons. And it frame the value will sit on. I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Naili Kalema.
My background is not technical, and so I'm more on the international relations, global political economy. So if you have questions about anything that I'm sharing, please let me know during the Q&A. But I think that Marie has gotten us off to a great start about talking about Ubuntu. And what I want to talk to you more about is why Ubuntu can make a meaningful contribution to how we think about different types of governance, of not only like governance with relationship to AI governance and AI ethics, but also with relationship to thinking about data commons and what would it mean for different types of entities, including states, which is the area that I focus on, to think about that. And so, as was already mentioned, it's fundamentally about humanity. It's a worldview that is very much indigenous to the African continent and that has flourished there for many years. And in terms of some of the different types of harms and privacy issues that we see specifically emerging out of many different African countries, approaching it from an individualistic point of an individualistic orientation may not be effective. And so Marie spoke to some of the limitations with regard to rule of law and some of the legal systems in people's ability to seek recourse. And so we're thinking, what are some other types of governance and mechanisms that we can explore around AI and data commons that can be protective? And so specifically, one of the foundational papers that I really reflect on and my colleagues really reflect on in our work was put out by a person named Sabelo Mulambi, who was a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Kennedy School. And basically, part of what he talks about in his work is exploring Ubuntu as a relational, as a relational personhood. And so it's a departure from the idea of thinking of personhood through the individual, but instead thinking about it in relation to other beings, in relation to the planet, in relation to other generations. And why that's important is it becomes a way to kind of reorient our thinking in terms of how we think about privacy, how we think about different types of harm mitigation and rights, and also thinking about what might our duties be to future generations that will come later. So a really interesting approach to thinking about sustainability in ways that can be productive for this current moment. And so he talks about how in terms of some of the different types of harm and structural violence that we see emerging around different types of algorithmic systems, or how data gets instrumentalized by these systems, whether they be public or private, is because we have this very individualistic type of orientation to it that doesn't really prioritize humanity in the same way, and particularly in contexts like the ones that we look at and discuss in our paper on the African continent, a lot of these mechanisms tend to fail. And so he explores that in his work, and we explore that in our work as well. Let's see, I only have 5 minutes. And one of the key points to emphasize is this idea of relational humanism. And so, again, kind of this departure from this kind of Western modernity type of orientation, which tends to promote the individual rather than the relational. And in terms of how we approach privacy, so through this consent-driven process focused on the individual's consent, even though at some points it's questionable to what extent do they have any ability to not consent to that to not give consent in a meaningful way. But that's to the side. I think this rethinks about what are the collective approaches, what are the participatory governance approaches that can be employed to help communities actually engage in this process of rethinking what type of approach do they want to take to the data that's being produced by them and by their communities, and in service to their public interest and public value. And so that's kind of what we emphasize, again, through this kind of relational humanism framing. In another paper, this comes out from I'm Datafied because we are Datafied, in Ubuntu perspective on relational privacy. And so one of the key contributions that we think this Ubuntu type of orientation to rethinking privacy with respect to AI and with respect to data is that we can think of it in a relational manner. So not only looking at what are the individual harms which might emerge from how these systems get used or how they get instrumentalized. I particularly look at that in relationship to government systems, but also in terms of what are the opportunities for us to maybe think about where harm may not occur for a specific individual, but because of how maybe data is being instrumentalized or categorized or being used, it may not actually be directed towards a particular individual. And so we need to think about what are the collective ways that we can understand harm and address it in a meaningful way so we can protect categories or groups of people across these different systems. And so group with respect to kind of this networked approach to privacy and a relational approach to privacy, I think are the two key contributions that this Ubuntu framing tries to add. And that's this idea of relational autonomy being something central to that. And then I think next, because time is getting short, in terms of thinking about this relational personhood, and so thinking about not only, you, the individual, but thinking about ourselves through our relations with others, through the different types of relations and dynamics that we see happening through digital public infrastructures, through different types of AI technologies, and through different types of data architectures, really addressing kind of these relational dynamics. And so, again, not just focusing on the individual, but focusing on the relational and through interactions being key. And so we think that this concept can also help us to maybe explore new ideas around what an Ubuntu approach in terms of solidarity, reconciliation, equality, equity, and community, what might that look like in the context of AI and data architectures, and how might we go about that process, not individually, but in a more collective manner. And so one of the tenets around Ubuntu being this idea of radical inclusion, the idea that we can learn something from many different types of actors that can help us to develop safer, better systems for people. I think I've run through my slides, but that was pretty fast. So if you have questions, let me know. But Simon, I'll let you take it away.
Yes, I understand there are limitations to time, so I'm gonna briefly kind of talk about the governance system that we eventually came up with. So now we know that data sharing itself is important. It's important for artificial intelligence development. We thought about the data governance philosophy, transitioning it from privacy to Ubuntu, and we have the sort of the theoretical groundwork now. So let's now talk about how can we construct a good governance system. And as Marie has briefly mentioned, the proposals of management, trust, cooperative, marketplace, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience know a lot more about this. I think eventually it is a governance system that reflects on an existing governance system that is very localized, right? Like a marketplace or a trust. It's building on something that already exists and helps us reimagine how we can govern data using those legal mechanisms. So with that, commons governance is an approach that we want to apply just because in Africa, this is a governance that already exists and it will be easier for, I think, people to understand and to manage and to work with. I do want to mention that I think data commons has become a buzzword and there are a lot of proposals out there. And I think what we've been trying to do, and specifically my interest in this, has a lot to do with Eleanor Ostrom's work on commons governance. I'm currently part of the Ostrom workshop and I'm working on a lot of projects. And I think this really helps us establish a good theoretical groundwork. Even though theoretically commons is something that is rooted in Africa, but if we look into what Eleanor Ostrom has been doing, it might offer us some more guidance. So Eleanor Ostrom made two main contributions. She won the Nobel Prize, and the two things that she really discovered is the first thing is the new category of good known as common pool resource. And this is based on the resource of the subtractability and also whether you can exclude other people from entering and using the same resource. The purpose of this, or at least the result of this, is to account for the tragedy of commons. That is a proposal that originally addressed that if a bunch of people are using the same resource, the resource is going to go extinct. Again, she uses this economic analysis to come up with different categories of good and then discovered 8 design principles to help us to learn about how to navigate the governance of these resources. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the upper left, common pool resource is what Eleanor Ostrom is talking about, and these are the 4 types of good. And let's situate that in data. And I think, again, as many of you are experts in data, the rivalrous nature, I think, is where this analogy of data as commons or as common pool resource, my first encounter, right? And this is the biggest challenge that we've been facing, sort of thinking about commons governance and data governance. How can these merge together? Next slide, please. And I think a lot of this thinking about data eventually overlooks the physical attribute of data governance, and this is where you can really have you can really rethink the rivalrous nature of this resource. So let's first think about how information is being produced, right? You have a book, and we can call that an artifact. You have knowledge within that book, right? Those are the ideas, but you also need a facility, right? And those are the local libraries out there, right? So even though you might have an excellent book in the local community, once that book has been borrowed out, there's no book anymore, right? So in that sense, information itself, the production of information, can have certain attribute of a common pool resource. And this is where we start to rethink about AI governance. So what if we rethought, we put that analogy in the production of a good AI model and think about the AI product, the service, however you want to frame it, is the artifact itself. what would happen there, right? And then let's think about the training data, the ideas, as as the idea that we pour inside. And then the data center, right? The GPU, the electricity that's needed are the facilities. I think this opens up a lot of possibilities there. And then under that framework, we can really think critically using what we thought about the commons governance, the Ubuntu concept, and then raise critical questions of establishing a AI data governance system. So, questions might include when it comes to artifact, what is the public interest in the artifact? What community is the artifact serving? Again, this relates to some of the proposals like the data collaborative. A lot of things actually overlap, but this helps us reimagine or resituate some of the critical questions in this structure. When it comes to ideas, we can really think about what types of knowledge is being produced, and specifically in facility, we can rethink about what is the investment mechanism. Is it national investment? Is it foreign investment? Who controls the infrastructure? All of these are, I think, very important questions that really we can open up. And next slide, please. So the main contribution, or at least the main goal that we're trying to make here, is to create a healthy localized data ecosystem, specifically in Africa. Again, just wanted to re-stress the point that right now, significant portion of Nigerian government agencies, around like 70%, have stored their data on services located outside the country. So this reflects on the facility attribute of data governance. I think that's also an important part when it comes to data governance, and which a lot of time we do not really think critically about. And so in this way, we can rethink private investment of the continent that can be deployed to build an open data ecosystem within Africa, maybe in partnership with private sector or maybe with academic institution. Moreover, the concept of privacy is not an important concept, so it might actually be reflected in the 8 design principles. But these are all the possibilities that it can bring in. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways, I think, for our presentation today is that we believe that there's still improvement with regard to continent-wide consensus and harmonization of data protection legislation. There's a huge potential to build a data governance framework under the philosophy of Ubuntu rather than privacy. And also, Ostrom's work on information as common resource can offer us a good starting point to build a localized African data common. Next slide, please. So here we want to invite all of you to join the conversation. And if you have any comments about data sharing, AI governance, African AI governance, Ubuntu, a lot of these are really experimental ideas that we're really playing around with, but that we also can see a lot of application in the industry. So we invite any collaborations or any ideas to work with us on this project. And I think that's about it for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Yep. Any questions? No?
No time.
Okay. Please reach out if you have questions.